Please welcome Richard Dolan.
Thanks, Dave. Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you. I suppose you can hear me. Yes, I hear my own microphone. Great. It's an honor to be here again. I think that this conference is probably, of all the UFO-related conferences that appear in the United States, this is probably the big gala event. Certainly, so many interesting people come out here, and I'm enjoying it, and I hope you are as well. So on the agenda for today is a topic I call UFOs for the 21st century. And this actually has evolved out of a couple of different projects that I've been working on. One is a lecture series that I've created and have offered online, actually, for an organization called the IMU, International Metaphysical University. How about that? You can take a course in ufology, and I created that course. And it was a really interesting experience for me to do that. And out of that course, I've created a book which is out in about 2 or 3 months, and that's called UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. I guess you can think of it as a new, fresh introduction, I think a sophisticated introduction to this entire amazing, mysterious field. The more I looked into it, the more I realized that it really was a field that was in need of a fresh overview for a new era. Not an overview that reads like 1985 all over again, but you know, we're in a completely different era, and I think that this topic benefits from a fresh, new look every now and then, and that's what I've tried to do. So, you know, when you think about ufology, is my slide? There we go. Think about our world and this field over the last generation. What we've all gone through collectively as a society. We've gotten the internet, the web, which 20 years ago we didn't really have. Much greater communication globally. I mean, we could really talk with almost anyone in the world at any time, realistically, with very, very fewer and fewer exceptions. So we're all talking to each other. Scientific knowledge has certainly increased tremendously in the last generation. Think about something as simple and almost mundane as exobiology. You know, 20 years ago, there was not one single planet that was confirmed to exist outside our solar system. Now, I don't know what the number is, it's probably around 1,000 or so. And we know that there are many, many billions of actual planets out there, and many of them Earth-like. That's no longer an issue. Advances in neuroscience, advances in computing, advances in across the board everything. We're in a completely different era now than we were just 20 years ago. We're in a point regarding the UFO topic that makes it interesting is that you or me, we could probably go to a store and probably buy, cheaply enough, our own little UFOs, remotely operated. You put some LED lights on them, send them up, and they look pretty good. And there's a lot of other technologies that are out there that's just going to make this more and more interesting and complicated from the point of view of UFO investigation. Between now and 20 years ago, we've had the rise in what I would call non-materialistic theories on UFOs. I think you can follow me here. Back in the old days, it was essentially a story of nuts and bolts, men and women coming from another planet, another galaxy in metallic spacecraft. No one really talks about that anymore. And increasingly, we hear about telepathic downloads from other intelligences. What do we make of that? Well, this type of approach has become very, very widespread. And even if you're not getting a telepathic download, there are certainly lots of theories having to do with interdimensionality and you know, things that are beyond a kind of 19th century Victorian materialistic scientific view of things that I think prior generations of ufologists were a bit attached to. And another big thing that we've noticed over the last generation is just a lot more noise, a lot more stuff out there to have to sort out, a lot more claims. There's literally not a day goes by when I don't get an email from someone saying, can you offer an opinion about this video, this picture, this claim, this whatever? I mean, it's just a nonstop thing. And So there's all of that. And then there's a lot of noise, not just in terms of the sightings and events, but actually in terms of some of the people. I have to say this. Not everyone's reliable. Not everyone's out there really to promote truth, in my own opinion. They're out there to promote some other agenda. So there's a lot of this in our field. It's gotten confusing. Just think, before I hit this next slide here, one big difference between the world of today and the world of, let's say 50 years ago, even 30 years ago. 30 years ago, still the biggest issue among researchers was probably getting access to sightings reports. It wasn't the easiest thing in the world. Now, I mean, it's exactly the opposite. We're flooded with sightings reports. If you go to just the top 2 websites for North America alone, the MUFON and National UFO Reporting Center, they collect about 10,000 sightings reports a year, right? About 10. If you add them all up, it's actually more than that. It's unbelievable. Now, of course, they're raw reports, and most of them, many of them, certainly will have conventional explanations if you look into it, but the point is that it's an extraordinary number. There's no lack of data. And then go to YouTube. You want to look for UFO videos, there's hundreds every year. Every year. Now, how do we make sense out of this? So this is a really important problem that we're facing in our world today for those of us who are interested in this topic. And then the fact is that we're dealing with a very, very multifaceted phenomenon. When you think about UFOs, there's any number of subsets that you could literally spend the rest of your life on, and you still wouldn't explore all of it. The history of sightings is one. That's really how I sort of got into this topic. I just was interested in the sightings themselves. It's an endless supply of data that you could go through and try to figure out what's good and what's not. It would take the rest of your life. Then you can study the politics and the cover-up. I've studied this a lot, too. There are other researchers here. My friend and colleague Grant Cameron's one who's also devoted himself into trying to understand this. It's one of those lifelong processes, and it's just one subset of what we would call the UFO phenomenon. Then let's, get where the rubber meets the road, as it were. That is contact between us and them, whoever they happen to be, whether through abduction or other forms of contact. Yet another area you could spend the rest of your life looking at. Related to that would simply be speculations on who are they? What are we dealing with? What's this all about? What's their agenda? You could spend a lot of time, many, many years, dealing with how do we properly investigate UFOs today. Then there's the scientific connections, which are almost endless. I spent a lot of time looking into this over the last year, and it just keeps going and going. From something as simple as propulsion, like, how do they get from point A to point B silently? It's obviously not using gasoline. That's an interesting scientific issue right there, and that's almost the most mundane of them all. How do they manage human memory when they apparently take people? How does something like teleportation work? Because that's what they seem to be doing. Is it related to entanglement? Maybe. What about space-time? Are they playing games with space-time reality? What about consciousness itself? Very important. All of these are key scientific questions that are related to the topic of UFOs. And, as you can see, this is a topic that is incredibly rich in intellectually and in every other way, and what it can offer a serious student. And then the topic of disclosure and the future. This is something that, as Lee mentioned, I wrote about not long ago. Writing that book, I often feel it was a great adventure in my life, forcing me to think just how revolutionary the entire UFO phenomenon is, because once you realize how disclosure of this would truly rock our world in every possible way, it's not hard to see why there's secrecy about it. A little more on that in a moment. And then human consciousness and ET. Well, I sort of touched on that a moment ago, but there's one thing that's become evident to me, in the 20 years that I've been into this field. I started out 20 years ago, very conservative. I'm still conservative, really, but not as much. And back in those days, I thought, well, I'll study UFOs, but I don't want to do anything weird. Really. It's like abductions, I don't think so. Cattle mutilations, heavens no. Crop circles, that's just too crazy, man. So, well, you know, that's all been out the window. I'm swimming in the deep waters with all of those. And one of these is the whole idea of consciousness and telepathic connection between us and them. This is, in my opinion, there's no question that this is the case. And so it comes down to what does it mean and how do we understand it? So all of these are really fascinating scientific issues. So obviously, when we're talking about UFOs, it's a lot more than just unidentified flying objects. And part of the problem that I've had when I think about this topic is there a better phrase than UFO? I mean, for goodness gracious. I think we've all wondered about this, and I've tried to come up with something. I haven't really come up with something better because the thing is that everyone knows what UFOs are. It's one of those phrases that just, it's like a brand globally. I mean, around the world. They all know UFOs. So we're kind of stuck with it, but maybe we can rethink it in a fresh way. So let me just go into some of the mini themes that I think are very interesting and that have been on my mind with this topic. For a good overview that gives us a deeper understanding of what this is all about. Let's look at UFOs in ancient times. I think many of us have, we've all seen Ancient Aliens, and it's become a very big thing in the last few years. I think there is some good evidence for ancient UFOs, and I think some of it's very overblown. One of the big themes that as I think I'll be hitting on here today is simply that what we really have to remember is we can't lose our heads with this topic. It's very easy to do. It is a fascinating topic. It is a great mystery. There is something very, very important here. So I think we can all agree on this. And I would simply urge everyone to remember that there is value in the scientific method and the use of reason and rational inquiry with any of this, rather than just listening to people who say, trust me, this is my information that I've gotten, and you have to trust me, and that's just that. And it has to be said, there are people who present at this very conference who do that. I'm not trying to attack them personally. I just don't find that to be a very productive philosophy in helping us move forward on this. When I look at the long history of evidence in the Ancient Aliens, Ancient UFO topic, I think some of it is incredibly intriguing, and I think some of it's very much overblown. No need for me to get into specifics here today. I just would put that out there for you. I think that we need a little more rigor, a little more caution in some of these claims that are out there that people often accept as gospel, which really are not gospel. Unfortunately, because we're sort of ghettoized away from the academic scientific world, a phrase that my friend Stephen Bassett has used, but because we don't, unfortunately, I don't think we really have enough really good, high-level, academic quality criticism of our own theories, and we need that. Unfortunately, we don't really have enough of it. Having said that, I think that there's some fascinating stories in ancient times that intrigue me, for sure. One thing that really we're hampered by, too bad, is the destruction of the very great ancient libraries, Alexandria most prominently, Constantinople. There was a lot of information there, and it's gone. It's probably gone forever. There are some suggestive stories. I have one here that I just mentioned from the reign of Thutmose III, from the dynasty that had King Tut and Akhenaten and those guys. Great story. It was written down. I don't know what it means, but it described a fireball coming from the heavens for several days in a row, scaring the hell out of the ancient Egyptians, throwing themselves on the ground, going to the pharaoh, finding out what it means. The manner of the description, this is from around 2500 BC. It's quite remarkable. What it seemed to describe, if you take the scribes at their word, this object came and it maneuvered and it came back for several days until they made an offering to it and it went. In fact, there was a number of these. They dominated the skies. They were more powerful than the sun. What is that? I don't know what that is. There are a number of interesting things in archaeology. I'm personally forever fascinated by the Great Pyramid of Giza. I am not of the opinion that it is conventional in any way. I think that there's something truly extraordinary about that. It's my own opinion. I mentioned the Egyptian fireball from Thutmose. There's one that happened in 1663 in southern Russia. We have a very, very good report of it. Same type of event. This thing comes from the sky, maneuvers, scares everyone in the town. We have a record of it from a priest written to his bishop. It was discovered in a monastery in the year 1800 or so. And it's just one of these many stories. They're out there. They're not easy to explain. A story that was recorded by Charles Fortin from the Mediterranean Sea, right off the coast of Sicily in 1845, written by a ship's captain. He's out at sea. He sees a light come up from the water. It's a craft. It's an object. It hovers above the water for a short while, and it goes off into the sky. 1845 in the Mediterranean. What's going to do that? Two more early stories I just want to share with you, and I'm doing this because when we talk about UFOs, one school of thought that we often hear is that they're covert, clandestine, black ops type of technology, whether developed by the Germans in the World War II era or after. You hear this a lot. I don't dispute this, but I do think that the reality is a lot more complex and a lot more interesting than that. This is a story that this is a sighting, rather, that took place in northeastern Tibet in 1927. That photograph is of a man named Nicholas Roerich. He was actually a very great artist. And interesting in another way, I'll tell you in just a moment. So he's leading a trek out in the Himalayas in 1927. This is where they are. They're in a region called the Altai Mountains in western Mongolia. There's nothing out there. There's no cities. There's no major population. It's desolate. So they're out there. And what he writes in his diary that we all saw, they were looking at a bird, and then above this bird, we all saw, he says, in the direction north to south, something big and shiny reflecting sun, like a huge oval moving at great speed. Crossing our camp, this thing changed in its direction from south to southwest. We saw how it disappeared in the intense blue sky. We even had time to take our field glasses and saw quite distinctly the oval form with the shiny surface, one side of which was brilliant from the sun. It's a really fascinating account. There was an attempt to debunk this as a balloon, believe it or not. I know. As crazy as that sounds, there actually was. This is insane. About 400 or more miles away, there was a party of Swedish explorers who did set aloft a small little weather balloon. They actually did. There were weather balloons in the 1920s. So someone made the argument that this is what Roerich's party saw. If you're rooting for an anomalous explanation, I think you're good, because I think that attempt to debunk it was absolutely a failure. I don't go through it here, but I went through it. I'm totally satisfied that it was not a balloon, not any remote chance of a balloon. We don't really know when the balloon was launched anyway, but around that time. And for a weather balloon to have traveled 400 miles is a near impossibility, particularly in the 20s. It just would not have happened. So, and it wouldn't have been seen. Would not have been visible in any way. So anyway, that's the Roerich case. The thing about Nicholas Roerich is that he and his wife were important early theosophists. And I say this because this brings, again, a connection of the mental aspect of UFOs. You know, his wife was one of the earliest translators of Helena Blavatsky's works, okay, if you're familiar with this. It's very odd. It's very odd, isn't it, that you've got this connection again and again. Is there something, because Roerich and his wife were both already very interested in non-physical realities, right, dimensions of reality beyond what we ordinarily observe. And you just have to wonder. That's about all I can say. Now here's a case that I found. I was in the Canadian National Archives a few years ago, and this blows my mind. This blows my mind. If you look at this map, I don't know if it's easy for you to see, a place called Aylmer Lake in northern Canada. This is even more remote than western Mongolia. No, I'm not kidding. It's actually harder to get to there than it's in western Mongolia. And the reason is it's impossible to have roads up there. There's just thousands and thousands of tiny little lakes. You can't do it. So I was in the Canadian Archives a few years ago, and I was reading an account Canadian citizens would write to their government about UFO sightings. Government never did a thing about it. They just take it and file it into a little file cabinet and hide from the reports. But the reports were there, and this elderly gentleman in the early 1980s wrote, he said, all I want to do is tell you what happened to me when I was 25 years old. I was doing aerial mapping work for the Canadian government. We were mapping that whole northern region. He had one of those cool planes that lands on the water, right? And he says, I was doing a little instrument check with my aircraft, and I happened to look up. And I'm going to read to you what he wrote. He said, at the time of the sighting, I was standing on the float of my aircraft performing a before-flight inspection when I happened to glance skyward and detected the vehicle in question, completely stationary. How long it had been there, and for whatever reason, I have no idea. At the time, the sky was azure blue, completely clear of all cumulus and cirrus clouds, making it virtually impossible to determine the height of the object in question. You can see this is a very, very, very intelligent man. In trying to describe this vehicle, I can only say that it was the most magnificent configuration of an airship one could imagine. I would say it was very large, but this would depend on the height, which, as stated, could not be determined. And then he says, from a north-south stationary position, it turned east in a moment. And incidentally, he described it as light aluminum color, no shine, elliptical shape, no portholes, okay? So then it turned east in a moment. The turning was hardly detectable to the eye. After the turn, it took off at a fantastic speed going east. From the time of takeoff until it vanished was a matter of moments. That's basically it. It's an amazing story. And it's just one of these that just sat in the archives for years and years and years until someone discovered it. In this case, I found it, and there it is. So there's something important going on here. It's 1936, truly in the middle of nowhere. What's going to be out there? Is that German secret technology too? Highly doubtful. I'm thinking no. So there's a phenomenon, I would say, that is the result of some intelligence, very quiet. They're obviously not making a big, big display of themselves, but they're around, and they're interested. And they were interested in him, probably. And by the way, that region of Aylmer Lake is it's in Northwest Territories. The capital of Northwest Territories is a little town called Yellowknife, and it was only 1 year earlier that Yellowknife had been the site of a major gold find. And I don't know if this is a connection, but I wonder. The population of that whole region was essentially nil, especially where he was. There was no people living there. To this day, there are no people living there. So again, that's just a little bit of some of the ancient evidence, early evidence that I think is suggestive. There's so much more. I want to go into the politics. To me, this is a very key part of the UFO phenomenon. And again, for a contemporary understanding of this, we really need to have get past some simplistic ideas about the politics, not only for evidence of the cover-up itself, but what we really need in our world today is to get a handle on what's the true structure of power. We need to get past the 6th grade civics lesson version of our government, like I vote for my member of Congress, and we have checks and balances, and we've got elections, and all of this stuff. That's not what it's about. We all know that, and we need to understand a little bit better what the true structure of power in this world is so that we can then have a better handle on how to deal with the actual cover-up. So I'm only going to do one slide on this. I used to spend so much of my lectures in the past on documentation. It's important, it's essential. Just suffice to say that if you are a skeptic wondering what's the evidence, there's some very good evidence. Not proof that UFOs are ET. Let's just forget about that for a moment. But there is proof in the form of released declassified U.S. government documents that this is a topic that they care about, that perplexed the hell out of them, and for good reason, because what we see in these documents are case after case of violations of sensitive airspace by objects just like that man in 1936, what he described, objects that don't look normal, that don't behave normally, that are extraordinary, that can zigzag, that can take off instantly from hovering and loitering, and shoo, there they go. And these are described in some of these military declassified reports that we have. And they're quite fascinating indeed. And the other thing that you learn from these reports is that they were taken very seriously. Of course they would be. I mean, come on, of course they would be taken seriously by the originators of these documents. Some of them are just breathtakingly dramatic. But this is my list. When that slide goes back up. There are a number of excellent documents. That's my quick list of, I think, some of the top documents that are available. I wrote an article about it, which I would encourage you to look at if you really want. I have all the documents there. You can read them, and I do my own little analysis of them, called 12 Documents Proving U.S. Government Interest in UFOs. I do think that at this point in the day, that's a slam dunk argument. Now, what's an interesting argument, and not quite a slam dunk, but maybe close, we don't have released documents on this, but we've got some pretty good evidence, I'd say some very good evidence, about the possession at deeply classified levels by certain scientists of alien technology and alien bodies. That's going a little farther than what the declassified government documents tell us. Nevertheless, there are many sources, many good leaks for this. Some of these leaks are up on the screen there. Ben Rich, who ran Lockheed's Skunk Works division for years. Barry Goldwater, astronaut Edgar Mitchell, Leonard Stringfield, James Goodall, aerospace journalist. A number of these people have they've all gone on the record. Edgar Mitchell, for example, he doesn't say this much anymore, but he did say it for years. He said it to me personally, which was that he had several ultra-elite individuals, and when you're a moon-walking astronaut, who's not going to want to be your friend? Ultra-elite individuals who told him explicitly of programs to study alien technology and alien bodies. I know who one of those individuals is. In fact, I spoke to that individual, and he got really mad at me. It was retired Admiral Thomas R. Wilson, former head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Barry Goldwater, former U.S. Senator, ran for president in 1964, famously had his own encounter, which he talked about with his buddy General Curtis LeMay when he asked about the rumors of bodies in Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And Goldwater told people, he says, the only time in my life that my friend Curtis LeMay cussed me out and said, never, ever, ever ask about that again. There's obviously something going on. And again, this is a case of the more you look, the more you find in terms of very compelling, I would say, persuasive to a rational mind, leaks about this phenomenon. There's quite a lot there. And yet, with all of that, we get nothing but denial from our own government. Doesn't matter the president, doesn't matter the party in power. They just say, no, 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 we know nothing about any of these UFOs, other than the fact that they're clearly misidentifications of natural phenomena and things like that. And yeah, we're interested in life out there, but there's still no evidence that there is any life out there. That was the latest Obama statement a couple of years ago. So it's just denial. Denial and jokes. Denial and jokes. Why? Why? Well, really, this takes us into some of the deeper aspects of the cover-up. And again, I'm saying this here to you today because I believe that what we must have in our era today is a better understanding of what really is going on with this cover-up. Well, one of the reasons for this disconnect, I would say, would be Cold War realities going way, way, way back to the 1940s and 50s. I mean, think about it. You're Harry Truman. You've got this awesome new reality thrust upon you, this reality of these other beings that probably are here. And we probably acquired some of their technology. It's a heavy thing to be dealing with in an era right after the Second World War, in which you've got people, millions homeless, millions more starving. Everyone just wants to get back to a state of normality. And now you've got this to deal with. Not really an opportune time to have to deal with it. And on the other hand, if you talk about it to the world, now you've got this technology, it's going to be very difficult to keep it away from your political enemies like Joseph Stalin and anyone else that you don't want to have this technology. So no, you don't want them to get into that. There's other reasons. Petroleum. Petroleum. All right? We live in a petroleum world. We know And even a 10-year-old child looking at one of these flying saucers can probably tell that they don't use petroleum. So whatever the answer is, whatever the energy source, it would portend, I would say, an end to the petroleum era. And in 1947, that's a very important thing, because, hey, you know what? The oil industry was boom, 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 all the way through the 40s and 50s and 60s. It was nothing but money, money in the bank, tremendous growth, and also, from their point of view, tremendous availability. We're never going to run out of oil, never. With 1950 levels of consumption, that's kind of true, but this isn't 1950 anymore. But at the time, it seemed, look, what do we want to rock the boat for? We're making all this money. I mean, oil ran the world as much then as it does now. So let's just, chill a little bit on ruining the petroleum industry, the automobile industry, all of that stuff. Let's just wait. Let's just get a handle on this, guys. Then you got the whole idea of social control. You let something out like this big out into the great unknown, it's not simply a matter of panic, although that's a real possibility. I mean, think of it this way. You yourself, you're the president, you don't know who these other beings are, really. You don't know their motivations, you don't know their capabilities. How are you going to be able to tell the world that you know for sure they're safe when you yourself really don't know? So, of course, you're going to be very careful about what you will say. There's no way you would just toss this out there. Much as we, the people, would like that, they're not ever going to do something like that, at least not initially. And then there's just a basic fear of the unknown. Again, you don't know who they are. You don't know what this is about. So I think the logical thing that any leader would do is you say, you get your people around you and say, let's figure out a game plan here. And we're going to manage this. We're going to control the press, the media. We're going to control the academic community. We can do it. Sure, you can do it. You put your guard dogs in prominent places. Some young professor gets interested in flying saucers. The big Harvard astronomer will smack him right down, a.k.a. Donald Menzel, which is exactly what he did. So this is the whole plan. And you do it within the world of journalism. You do it with any of the important institutions that you need to. And you keep this lid down. And maybe it might have been the case that they thought at some point they would revisit this and open up the truth. But the problem with secrets is that they love to continue to live. And once you get a secret going, it develops its own power. We all know this. Everyone's kept secrets. We all know how a secret can just kind of take over your life if you let it. And one aspect of this secret that really had the power to take over was the creation of black budgets. And think about it. You've got this important program. You have to fund research on it. You're not just going to sit on your hands looking at the flying saucer technology. You're going to try to replicate it. All of that costs money. The security on the program costs money. You got to get the money from somewhere, but you can't just tell Congress, we need appropriations to study flying saucer technology, obviously, because there goes the secret. So you have to do a black budget. You create an end run around your formal system of government. You have to do it. It's illegal, but that's how you look at it. You've got to do it. So you create this enormous infrastructure which develops its own power, its own tangled web that goes within your own system and kind of takes over the system after years and years and years and really becomes independent of any oversight and any legitimate oversight by the people. We're in a situation now where everyone knows that we've got one of runaway secrecy. Been a few, not enough, only a few public studies of our black budget culture that you could find. Most recent decent one in the public domain was from the Washington Post, Dana Priest and Bill Arkin a couple of years ago. Basically what they said, and this is the same as a very good article by Bill Sweetman from over a decade ago, is that we have a black budget community that is out of control, basically. There's a total lack of public oversight of these special access programs, these black budget programs. No one knows how much money's gone into them, but we do know they're all massively privatized. They're privatized. So the real power isn't in your DOD liaison or representative, it's in the attorneys and the accountants at Lockheed or Boeing or General Dynamic or Raytheon. The people running the programs, they're the guys with the power. And really what the situation is that you've got the private corporate entities on top. The government, Pentagon people are seen as less powerful in many cases, according to these few studies that we have available. Makes perfect sense to me. If you look at an image of a big iceberg, that's our world. You know, all of the released government documents, for example, that we have on UFOs are of very low levels of secrecy. If you want a top secret UFO document, well, good luck. There's only a small handful that actually were top secret that have been declassified. Most are unavailable to us, even though we know for sure that the UFO topic has been classified at top secret for more than 60 years. So there's a lot that's being hidden from us. There was a study a couple of years ago by a fellow named Trevor Paglen called Blank Spots on the Map. It's a book. His own estimate was that roughly 50% of all U.S. government documents that exist are, in one way or another, classified. So if you're a historian or an archivist looking into your government's political history, you could argue that half of your government's history is secret. Pretty big thing to say. Within this black budget structure, again, they're not just sitting on their hands. They're trying to understand this technology. They're trying to replicate it. Of course they are. Now I'm getting into a little more, this is slightly more speculative, but not a lot more. We're talking about crashed UFOs, for example. When you really go through the literature and through the research, you find that it's a lot more than just Roswell. There are quite a few cases where it looks like this is what happened. There's so many stories of crash retrievals. I'm sure many of them are not what they appear to be. Okay, fine. Having said that, there are many that look very legitimate, at least in my own opinion, and that of many others. So if you've retrieved a few of these, obviously you're going to be trying to transfer the technology to your own benefit. This goes to private groups. If you're the military, you have to go to private contractors. There are your people, their job is to make the things that you need. So obviously they're going to have to get this. And it goes all privatized, which means that now everyone's making money from it. They're all making good money from this advanced tech. It goes into this deeply clandestine secret infrastructure to create our own flying saucers. Have we done that? My opinion, yes. I think that's what we've done. And I think we've done it for more than 30 years at the least. There have been some very good leaks, good inside testimony. It's all publicly available now. I mentioned James Goodall a little earlier in this lecture. He's one of the journalists who uncovered a number of people who said, yes, we have basically stuff that's better than Star Wars, better than Star Trek, better than anything you can imagine. This is in 1985. All right. Do we have a secret space program? Yes, I think we do. If you look at anomalies of Earth orbit, there are no shortage of these things. Now, I don't know if they're ours or if they're not ours. If they're ours, then obviously we have a secret space program. But even if they're not ours, to me, that's prime motivation for a secret space program. So you've got these things out there that are not supposed to be there. Clearly, you're going to want to investigate them. You're going to need to do it privately, secretly, so that no one's looking. That's a secret space program, and I think that's what we have. I've had a theory that I've worked a couple of years now called breakaway civilization. I think it's legit. Don't know for sure, but I think it makes perfect sense to me. Ask yourself a question. What happens when you have total, like let's say we're part of a clandestine group, and we're all geniuses, and we all have lots of money, we're completely secret in what we do, and we've got ET technology that we're studying. So how much time would it be before we come up with a few eureka moments of our own, right? So we would develop maybe better integrated circuits or better, like maybe fiber optics or a whole bunch of other new developments that would be great money makers. And what if we come up with breakthroughs that are beyond that? Anti-gravity technology, electrogravitics, or a new source of energy. Well, if we do that, my guess is that we would not be segueing that into the consumer market right away. We would probably be told to continue working on it, though. And after a while, if that technology we have is classified and therefore illegal for outsiders to have access to, we've got an inside track, don't we? Basically holding the future hostage for the rest of the world, but we can continue developing on our fast track. And that's the way science works, is one breakthrough will lead to another, which will lead to another. And if we've got access to those breakthroughs and no one else does, the sky's the limit. Could we create our own flying saucer? Yes, of course we could. Have we? Well, again, I think the answer is yes. As a result, what's necessary is for those people who have the power, you have to control the minds of everyone else. We could give an entire series of lectures on this theme, obviously. The whole concept of our popular culture, I think honestly, it's always been kind of trivial and foolish, but I just think it's getting worse and worse and worse. On my flight over here, I was taking a United flight. You know, they have the screen that comes down and they give you the movie. I didn't watch it. It was another Pixar movie. Like, we need another Pixar movie. The world demands more Pixar movies. It just looked like sheer idiocy to me. Okay, maybe I'm not being fair, but... And then after that, they do the sitcoms with the intensely obnoxious canned laughter. And then after that was voyeuristic, vicarious fun by looking at homes of the very wealthy. You know, all on the plane ride. I'm thinking, come on. But this is what they want to feed your head with. They want to feed your head with garbage so that you're really not thinking about anything else. Because you work hard in your day, you do 40, 50 hours a week, you come home, you're tired, you want your beer, you want your family, your people, and you turn on the TV, and who's got energy to fight the power after that? You just really want to relax. You know, I understand. So what they do is they make it easy for you, and they just want you to zone out. And they're very successful, and they're very good at it. It's all about mind control. It's all about keeping you subdued, and they have to do that because if you start asking the real questions, that causes trouble. Now, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Investigating UFOs today, I think we need to step up our game. Let's just put it that way. This is a very difficult subject. It's a very difficult subject. There's this an old story of the 6 blind men and an elephant. You know, you've probably heard this. And depending on where you're standing and touching the elephant, you're thinking it's something else. If you're grabbing the ear, you're thinking, oh, well, this is a fan. It's a big fan. If you're grabbing a spear, the tusk rather, you're saying, well, this is a spear, and on and on. And that's really what our field is. That's what UFOs are. Depending on where you're standing, it looks like something very, very different. It's a difficult subject, let's face it. And I do want to just remind us all that when we see what we think may be a UFO, it probably is not. Probably is not. You know, let's not always get excited over every little thing we see. There is this so-called 90% rule. Basically, I think it's about right. Probably 90% of all sightings are easily, or given enough time and energy, you can explain it. There's a reason that you saw what you did, and it's not necessarily anything truly anomalous. And as I mentioned earlier in this talk, I mean, today it's actually more complicated than ever. It's easier than ever for ordinary people. Forget the black budget classified stuff, that's another issue altogether, but just ordinary people to send things up into the sky that can confuse and even frighten unknowing people. And our own perceptions are not perfect. We make mistakes. A number of years ago, my wife Karen and I were leaving Roswell early in the morning from having a nice conference there. It was like 4 a.m., beautiful desert sky. We get out to look at the moon, and we both saw this, what looked like this object zipping around the sky. And we thought, wow, what is that? And it was framed by some clouds, and we thought it looked like it was going from here to there to there to there, until I took my camera and I put it on the roof of my car. And I looked at it through the camera, and then I could see it wasn't moving at all. It was what you'd call a scintillating star. It's a common effect. Atmosphere plays tricks with your eyes. It happens. Happens. So I'm just saying we are serving ourselves if we remember a little bit of caution. On top of that, as I was just talking about the cover-up aspects a moment ago, we're in kind of a hall of mirrors where, by that I'm simply saying, there has been and there will continue to be disinformation littering our field, like garbage on the sidewalk, and you got to step around it, you have to move it away, and it's difficult. There's just a lot of confusion in this field, and I believe it is by design. For example, well, I mentioned this enormous database of sightings, so we've just got a lot to choose from. There's YouTube. You want to look for UFO videos? Go on YouTube, you'll find it. You want to find insider claims and testimonies, whether from someone who says he worked at the NSA, to someone who said he was a super soldier, to someone who says that he or she had communication with an entity. It's all there. It's all there. None of it, or very little of it, is verifiable. We have social media, aka the greatest addiction in the world, Facebook, where we see copy and paste journalism basically take over our lives. Oh, I heard this story from this guy. Boom. I like that. Let's share it. And it goes out, and everything becomes viral instantly without really being fact-checked. We have, at the same time, decline of professional journalism. Very much so. So there's really not enough true investigation of this by responsible either organizations or people actually to go out there and fact-check and to get the goods on the latest claims. We are in an era of outrageous, unsubstantiated claims, unprovable. Remember Comet Elenin? Yes, you do. That was all through 2011, and that was going to, what was it? That was a spaceship, we were told. 6 months of wasted energy and hype that led to absolutely nothing, except it frittered away your time and mine on something that really was just not there. It was not worthy of our attention. Appearance of ET on Pick Your Date, the predictions, they just never stop. Project Bluebeam, this was a few years ago. I don't hear much about Bluebeam now. I wrote an article on why Bluebeam wasn't going to happen in October of, 2010, I think, when there was a big hype for that. That, in other words, the false alien invasion to scare the hell out of you so you give up your rights to the global police state. Not saying they don't want to take your rights, but I'm just saying Bluebeam wasn't going to be the one. Black budget created disasters, that is, secret wars, underground bases. There was one a couple of years ago where the good guys nuked the bad guys in their underground base. Good for us, yay, we won. Where's the evidence? There's no evidence whatsoever, just inside claims told by people who want to make themselves important and had nothing, absolutely nothing to show for it. It's a waste of time. The whole 2012 ascension, transformation, whatever. End of the world, shed your mortal coil and become some entity that doesn't need food or shelter. It was like a mass cultural death wish. That's exactly what it was, a death wish. What is ascension? It's dying. The world is in a kind of sucky situation, we all know. It's bad. And the temptation for everyone is to say, oh my God, it's so bad, let's just forget all of that and we'll ascend. Right? So this is a danger. It's a danger. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to have a better future. But when we lapse into fantasy, especially unprovable, unsubstantiated claims by people who say that they have the truth, this is a danger for all of us. Basically, my personal beef has always been predictions and predictions and more predictions. It's a never-ending. It is the bane of this field. And I would just suggest when you hear predictions, run away. And don't get sucked in by it. There's enough that we have to deal with that really matters, that's important. What do we need to get out of this prison that we're in? It's really what it is. I think there are ways of breaking free. One, there's obviously a need for genuine, feet-on-the-ground, rational investigation. If we're looking at UFO investigative organizations, let's say MUFON, that's the one that comes to mind here in the U.S., MUFON, in my opinion, I've said this before, this is why I don't think I've been invited back to speak there since I said this 2 years ago. It's the truth. It's an organization very much in need of reform. I doubt it will ever get it. But what they need to do is they have to have reliable investigations. It's hard to do it with no money, admittedly. They need to create clear reports. They need to publicize their findings, which they don't do. They do not do that. It's like a big black hole. They keep saying, well, we're changing. I have yet to see that change. And they need to be, and this is where I don't think they'll ever succeed, be demonstrably independent from the intelligence community. They have to have trust in the wider public, and they don't have it. They don't even have it among many of their members, and I know because I speak to all of them. We need an independent, investigative organization that will actually not just do the job, but maybe inspire people along the way. Because there is such a hunger for information in the world on this topic, and you all know this. You talk to someone who you've never thought you had an interest in UFOs, and you give them a couple of interesting things, and they're like, wow, I want more, right? This is very widespread. Why cannot any organization that's existed for 40 years tap into that? I don't know why. It's a good question they should be asking. That's for starters. What we also need globally is, again, we've got to step our game up here. We need greater international collaboration. You know, there is a place called Europe, and they have investigators out there too, and some of them are excellent. They have their own tasks that they need to do. What we need, they don't have a good database, in my opinion, of sightings, but I think some people out there are working on it. We're in the 21st century. We have capabilities here where we can communicate vastly better than we ever could before, so we need to make use of that. Not just Europe, but Africa and China, Australia, all of these places. I do think that will happen. Yes, that's a good thing to clap about. We need better relationships. And we're stumbling along, but I think it can happen. What do we need? In our barrage of information that I've been talking about, YouTube, Facebook, and everything else, we need a philosophy. We need a way to grasp this topic and not get lost. One is a healthy skepticism. I'm not saying a debunking skepticism. I'm saying, normal, rational demand to have evidence. That's when a claim is presented to you. Yes, that's a good thing. We need to be educated in the field. The UFO topic is like any other genius out there. You can't have the genius come to you. You have to go to the genius. You have to go to Beethoven. You want to appreciate Beethoven, you can't just say, okay, entertain me. You've got to appreciate the great artists, the great thinkers on their terms, because they have a lot to offer you. UFOs is like that. We need to respect the topic of UFOs because there is so much there that it will offer us. We need to also educate ourselves in contemporary science and modern technology because all of this is very, very interdependent. They're all connected with UFOs. We need better web research skills. Again, I was saying people ask me all the time to comment on this video, that photograph. There are certain basic things all of us can do, all of us, as web researchers. Using the Google search engine, you can search by date. This is very, very important when you want to get to the origin of a story. When is the first time a story appeared? And that can often help you to determine how authentic or legitimate it is or not. And you can do that. You can do something called a reverse image search. I've been using this a lot for the last year. It helps you find any other examples of that image anywhere on the web. It's critical. When you're shown a UFO photograph, quick way to find out if it's been done before and if it's a hoax. There's a lot of other things out there, and I've written about this actually, and I've talked about this in the lecture series and in my book that's coming out in 2 months. We need to be also a little comfortable with uncertainty. Look, this is a very difficult topic. It's very unlikely that we're going to get every single answer. It's okay if we don't know the answers about a few things. And we need courage on 2 levels. We need courage to face the world and to say, yes, this is real. And we need not to worry if someone wants to snicker or smirk or laugh at you. Forget that. That's ridiculous anyway. But we also need courage with our own beliefs. We need courage to challenge ourselves. Because I can tell you this, if it were as simple as the Matrix where you take one red pill, that would be great. I'd take one pill, and then I'd have reality. But it's not that simple. I've gone through more transformations in my own worldview than I can count. And you have to be willing to do that to yourself. You have to be willing to challenge your own belief systems, or you're not going to get anywhere in this field. A little more. I don't know how much time I have. Am I running out? Do I have 15 minutes maybe? 20? Oh, good. Okay. I'm going fast because, I do this every time. I cram too much stuff in. And so there we go. So a little bit about science. I think this is one of these things that's so important in contemporary ufology, and it doesn't get enough attention. It gets some, but not enough. It needs more. I talked earlier about propulsion. Ask yourself, what can allow a craft that can just hover indefinitely and then there it goes, it's gone? It's an incredible thing. Making right-angle turns, zigzagging. All of these things have been observed and recorded. If you recall I think this is something that we made, About 20 years ago on the television show Hard Copy was a video leaked out of Nellis testing grounds in Nevada of an object that was doing incredible maneuvers being recorded by a classified Air Force camera. And you can watch it on YouTube. There's been a lot of analysis done of that video, and I'm thinking that's something that we made. Anyway, it did instant accelerations. It did right-angle turns at like 140 miles per hour. Pretty impressive. That was in 1994. What allows an object to do that? What's the system of propulsion? You know, the aerodynamics of it. How does all that work? Often doing it silently. Probably, I would say the best bet is what we call electrogravitics, which is simply using an electrical field or charge. You polarize an object that has this, usually of a disc-shaped object is what works best. This is something that's been studied for a long, long, long time. Thomas Townsend Brown pioneered it way back in the 30s and 40s. And it would seem to me that this is very, very key. There's been some very good recent scientific papers that have been written on electrogravitics that, in my view, do seem to support this as a valid form of propulsion. The mainstream science still blows it off, doesn't think it's important. But again, that to me is just a sign that this is classified, and the mainstream is just, they're not supposed to. It's my opinion. That's what it looks like to me. Another aspect of UFO science that is critically important to our world is energy. Energy. How, you know, what's the source of energy of these objects? Again, it's not oil. Can't be. Come on. It's not going to be gasoline. Is it nuclear fusion? I think that's a real possibility. Nuclear fusion is one of these holy grails that scientists have talked about for 50 years. Yeah, we're 10 years away. We're 10 years away. Okay, well, we're still not there yet, and a lot of people have gotten a little inured to the claims, understandable, but if you really look at the contemporary literature on nuclear fusion, it I think genuinely does look that we are very close. The thing about nuclear fusion, it's not like fission. Fission, you rip apart an atom, and it creates a tremendous amount of energy and a lot of radiation, radioactivity in the process. Very bad for you. Fusion is you fuse. It's what the sun does, we all know. It fuses hydrogen atoms, and it releases a tremendous amount of energy, much more than fission, and it creates helium, which is inert. So it's not dangerous, as far as anyone can tell. It seems very clean. You get fusion, that by itself would transform a lot of our world, and it would certainly allow for sufficient energy to do the kinds of things that we see that UFOs are able to do. There are other possibilities. The previous lecture mentioned zero-point energy. I think there's certainly a lot of work done on zero-point. The jury is out as to whether or not zero-point can actually generate the amount of energy that people are talking about, but it might. It might, if we just find a way to do it. And those devices may, in fact, exist in the classified world. Certainly, it seems like it's potentially a viable form of energy. If it works, that also would transform our world. And this is a very practical connection that the UFO phenomenon has with our ordinary world. Why does it matter? Well, that's one reason it matters. If we get a disclosure on the UFO reality, it's going to immediately, I would say, start a global discussion on the source of energy that they're using, and I think that would lead very quickly to a transformation of our energy paradigm. Then there's space-time connections. I mean, to me, this is just as fascinating as any of the others. There's a mathematician, physicist named Miguel Alcubierre. 20 years ago or more, developed his own theory of warp drive, like in Star Trek. It works mathematically. A lot of physicists are taking this theory very seriously. The idea is simply a way to overcome the light speed barrier. So, we've all heard Einstein's theorem, E equals mc squared, makes it impossible. You can't go faster than the speed of light. Well, the neat little thing about Alcubierre's theory is that you don't, and yet you do. And essentially, the way you do it is you create a disturbance in space-time. So you shrink space-time ahead of you, you elongate it behind you, and you're kind of riding this wave. Within the bubble, you are not exceeding the speed of light, but you are essentially bending space so that, in effect, you're going vastly faster than the speed of light. Warp. take us out of orbit, Mr. Sulu, ahead warp factor 2, whatever. So that's really what Alcubierre is talking about, and I think he did it in a way that is mathematically sound, as far as anyone can tell. Let's get into some weirder UFO-related science. How about dimensions? There are physicists out there, whether it's Michio Kaku or David Green or many others, who talk about string theory and multi-universes. And it's not necessarily immediately contiguous with the UFO field, but I think that it's related. I think it is, particularly when we are talking about look, the UFO phenomenon is strange, and it acts in a strange way. That's why they have the phrase high strangeness. There are things that are going on in this phenomenon that don't really make sense in our physics, in our reality. And I personally think that there is a connection here. So with something like string theory, we're talking about, whether string theory works or not. It would be a kind of grand unified theory of physics. Because what they're really saying is that all of reality at the fundamental level are these little filaments of energy that dance and vibrate, vibrating strings. And the different vibrations produce different particles, energy, and matter. So the strings would be the foundation of matter and energy, and that would essentially give you a grand unified theory of physics. The problem, at least as some of the physics have said, is that the math only works if you have 11 dimensions of reality. But now that number has since been expanded, I believe. Who knows, I talked to one physicist, an old friend of John Mack, Rudy Shield at Harvard, who said, that's all nonsense. That's like medieval theologians saying how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. Maybe. He says they're just playing games with numbers. That's some opinions, but not everyone believes that. But the idea of string theory leads very easily to an idea of a multiverse, multiple dimensions of reality, multiple universes. I think it's certainly interesting, and I'm not a physicist. I can't really judge this, but it seems interesting to me, and from my little perspective over here, I think, hey, it does seem possible. Bottom line, though, of all of this is that physicists themselves don't really have an overall structure of reality that really totally works for everything. What that means is that there's holes in our formulations of reality, and that's where the UFO phenomenon, I believe, is very, very important, because it's probably part of that hole. Whatever's missing in our current physics, I will bet you that's where the UFO phenomenon is. So again, it's important from a scientific point of view from that alone. It's very significant. And then we get into something even stranger still, entanglement and consciousness. Einstein never liked entanglement. What is entanglement? You have two tiny little particles, okay? And they're connected somehow. They vibrate at exactly the same frequency. And they can do it if they're this close, or they can do it if they're as far apart as a galaxy or more. We don't know why, but it's the case. It's true. It's called entanglement. And that connection is a faster than light speed connection, by the way. Einstein hated this. He called it spooky action at a distance. Never liked it, went to his grave not wanting it, but it's been proven. There's not a shadow of a doubt that entanglement is real at the atomic level. So the question is, does it exist for consciousness? Does it exist in consciousness? Can minds be entangled? It's a great idea. I think maybe. Dean Radin wrote a great book called Entangled Minds that I think it's a must-read in this field. It came out about 6-7 years ago, I think. It's a theory, but it's a neat theory that would, I think, go a long way to explain what we would call psi phenomenon, telepathy, things like this. Some version of entanglement at the conscious level, I think, is probably real. And, there's so much more when we get into contemporary issues with UFOs. Do your thoughts, to what extent, shall we say, do your thoughts create reality? And there's so much bound up in that statement, because what is reality? What are your thoughts? We know that, you think things and then things happen. So yes, your thoughts, of course, they create reality. But is it more than that? Do your thoughts create reality external to the physical body that you inhabit? Entanglement theory seems to me to leave that door open. And I like that because whereas I'm not a subjectivist, in other words, I'm not one of these people who says, well, if it's true for you, then fine, cool, whatever. I do believe that there's this thing called truth, and it's independent of your beliefs. That's my opinion. Maybe I'll change that. Who knows, right? It's only life. But really, we're just doing our best here. That's all we can do. But I do like the idea that there is a scientific direction that might be able to give us some good explanations here. I like that. So moving on, let's leave science alone for the moment. Who are we dealing with? This is another serious matter, and it's enveloped in so much confusion. So much confusion. Again, these are some images of UFOs of the last decade or so. And they're all like these little disc-shaped things, these little balls of light. We're not talking about metallic craft necessarily. There are sightings of that too, of large, huge craft. But you get a lot of these little things, these objects in the sky. What are they? Who are they? It's a complicated answer here, I think. I don't know if we really have the true answer. It's not just metal ships from another galaxy, necessarily. Who are they? There's so many possibilities here. And I think that we're a little foolish if we really think we have one and we're just going to, this is what they are, and we're not open to some of the others. Are they extraterrestrial? I still think that's a very good bet. I mean, look, there's a lot of life out there in the universe. I think we all realize that now. How difficult is it for us to imagine that someone else at some other place developed the technologies that allow them to leave their planet? Advanced artificial intelligence, advanced computing, and all of those things. Really. We ourselves are just about there. So I think it's realistic to assume someone else has probably reached that point. Are there Earth-based aliens, however, that simply like it here? They like living here, but they don't really want to hassle with the natives. I've wondered, you know, we can be a little annoying, let's face it. Are they from another dimension of reality, like I was talking about, the multiverse concept? Is it related to that somehow? Again, I don't know. Are they a lost human civilization? That might be related to the Earth-based aliens thing. Are they the traditional biblical interpretation of angels or demons? Or is that all somehow related to dimensional interpretation? Do they travel through time? There are many people who are adamant about this. I can say in my own research that a lot of them are perfectly human looking, but they're not like humans. They're different somehow, and there's a lot of that's in there. And so that's a problem. And then the other thing you might want to ask is how really will we know what they truly are? Even if they have our best interests at heart, they might not be truthful. As I often mention to friends, I mean, if we were to time travel back into the distant past, how much could we tell those people about our own society, our own technology, our own beliefs? Probably very little. Probably very little, without their heads just going, you know. What, the Earth goes around the sun? That's crazy talk. Germs, what? You know, and you fill it any other reality. There's just only so much without the whole society, ancient society, just come crashing down. What are they? Well, I can tell you one thing I think they are. They're telepathic. They have the ability to get into your head. They have the ability, in the connections that they have with people, whether for a benign or not benign reason, to get into your head. They have the ability to connect minds with machines somehow. They have the ability, I think, to manipulate space-time to some degree. I mentioned memory management. They have the ability, basically when they take you, they can wipe your memory of that time to a certain extent. I think they're bioengineered. I think that makes the most perfect sense. When we talk about artificial organisms, artificial intelligence, we have to get beyond the idea that this is purely inorganic machine intelligence. All right, that's important. And the fact is, in the next generation, your computers are going to be smarter than you and me. I'm not excluding myself from this. They'll have probably better capabilities. This is not fantasy. If you think UFOs are crazy, read some good books on the future of AI. This is widespread mainstream belief that computer intelligence will exceed human intelligence. But it's not simply inorganic. We've mapped the human genome. We're playing games with human DNA. It's only a matter of time. We all know this before human being itself is tinkered with. Maybe they'll be super intelligent and they'll also be super insane. I wouldn't doubt it. You know, you start messing around. But the point is that bioengineering with biological and inorganic materials, I think, is going to be happening. I think that's what's happened to them. At least it makes sense to me. I think they live here too. Abduction and contact. I'm moving fast because I don't want to lose anything. We have to come to grips with this. We have to come to grips with abductions. What is happening to people when they are taken? Well, there's been a lot of, I think, dedicated researchers on this. I tend to agree, I think, with the fact that there are entities, let's call them grays, that take people. They're not, I think, the only entities that take people. I do think there's a military abduction thing going on, very much so, I think that. But certainly there are abductions that are going on by these other entities, and it has to do with human reproduction, it has to do with human DNA, and it seems to have to do with creating a different type of a species, a hybrid species, let's just say. Makes sense to me. If you want to live here long-term on this planet, but your body is not suited for it, you would take native DNA, you would also tweak it, and you would manipulate it so that it does the job you want it to do. One of the odd things about contact in my own investigation, I will say a few things about people who've been abducted, that qualities that they seem to share, at least in general. One is that they have what you would call psychic capabilities. I don't know about all of them, but a lot of them. And yeah, I know it's very common for everyone to say, oh, well, I'm psychic. And you hear that a lot, but I really think genuinely that this is the case with many people. There's something about it. And the reason I think, this is my own theory, that people like that are more likely to be taken, and their children are more likely to be taken, is if you're an ET, or you're an other, as I often like to call it, and you are intensely telepathic and psychic, you're looking at the mass of humanity out there, I'll bet you that you would be more interested as well in those individuals who've got those abilities. You would find things in them of interest, and they would be the ones that you would take. It's my thought. It's also very likely that the act of you taking those people would trigger things within them. There's been many, many individuals who've had abduction experiences, and this is exactly what they say. They triggered new mathematical abilities, artistic, psychic abilities, all of that. There's a connection. There's odd connections, too, ones that I'm personally not comfortable with, but what I've seen a number of times, which is symbolism going on, numerological consistencies, the number 333, 3:33 a.m. Why do so many people who've had these experiences seem to wake up and look at the clock and it's 3:33 a.m.? I'll bet there's some of you out there. Or other types of odd numerological consistencies that ordinarily do not make sense. I don't have the answer to this, but I wonder about it. I do think that the abduction phenomenon includes a shadowy human group that's monitoring this. Wouldn't shock me if a few of them are here. They do. They come to the conferences. So that's the bottom line. I think there are certain people who are abducted throughout their lives, and they are monitored by human and non-human entities and groups. That's in my opinion. Now, I'm getting close to wrapping this up here. Did I miss something here? Hold on. I want to make sure. Beg your pardon. Okay, good. There's a philosophical divide in this field, and you've kind of gathered that I've been talking about this. Let's call it subjectivism versus objectivism, spiritualism versus materialism, religion versus science, if you like, or you could say trust versus evidence. And I'm not trying to be pejorative one way or the other here. I'm not trying to throw values down one way or the other, but I think that there's this divide. In other words, there is, on the one side of investigators and researchers, you have people who try to adhere to the old values of what they used to call scientific ufology. That is evidence-based investigation, not going too crazy with speculation on what's going on, but rather concrete investigation of the material reality that seems to be happening here. On the other side, increasingly in the last 20-plus years, is an entirely different school of thought. Individuals who will claim to have had communications from these other entities. For my own part, I'm very sympathetic to both sides of this. I happen to believe now that there are such people who've had these types of connections, these telepathic connections. The problem is, as always, is how to treat it scientifically, how to deal with it in a responsible way, rather than just someone saying, yeah, this happened to me, trust me. I will have to admit to you, I don't really know if I have a way yet to deal with that that's satisfying to me. But I do think that if there's a future in this field, we have to understand this whole concept of, we can call it non-locality, the way a physicist might, I suppose. Science of the mind is necessary. Science of consciousness and entanglement, all of these, that's why I was talking about it earlier. We need to make progress in understanding this so that we can resolve this kind of philosophical gulf that does exist in this field. Another thing that I think is very important, and this is where, I admit I sometimes get very angry about this, in terms of how this is ridiculed by the rest of our society. What we are dealing with is a phenomenon. It's not a game. It's serious. And there are people who have had experiences. They do not know how to process this. I've spoken to so many of them myself. Men, women, doesn't matter. Something happened to them years ago. They've told no one. No one. Until they tell a researcher like myself, and I'll talk to them. And almost every single time, 1 minute into it, 60 seconds, they start getting emotional. Their voice starts going up. They sometimes will hyperventilate. There have been many times when I have had to say to this person, you've got to slow down. It's okay. You're safe. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a guy who will listen. And fortunately, I've had to learn to be a good listener. People need that. And they've had traumatic experiences. I spoke with one woman, very brilliant, published mainstream journals and magazines. I mean, just a cool person. She's telling me about an experience that happened like 40 years ago. She was on a date with a guy. They're driving, and as she gets to the point where she describes this dark craft over the exit of the highway, she began hyperventilating, and she actually said, my heart's palpitating. I have to stop. And she hung up the phone, and we eventually finished our interview. A man that I spoke with who had an experience about 30 years ago, he's a truck driver. He's a regular guy. He's a good guy. He was out fishing one night with a bunch of friends. He describes this light that's coming down, and he starts getting very excited to me. He's very upset. The next thing I knew, by the way, they were all on the shore yelling and screaming and hysterical. And then he says to his friends 30 years ago, we must never talk about this ever again. And if any of you say that something happened, I'll call you a liar. And as he's describing this to me, he said, why the heck would I do that? And it seems very likely, because they had 2 hours of missing time, that whoever took them drilled that idea into him. Never talk about this, or you will regret it, or you'll die of a heart attack, or something. Okay? And this is out there. And yet, what do we have in our society? We have jokes and ridicule and all this ridiculous trivialization of this incredibly powerful event that has harmed, I would say, many, many individuals. And on the other side of it, not everyone who's had an experience feels that they've been damaged. Some people really feel that it was a good thing for them. They've gone through a transformation. Not always an easy one. John Mack used to say, well, not that abductions are a wonderful thing, but he said, look, if you're really going to transform who you are, you're going to have to shed a lot of illusions that you have about yourself. You're going to have to go through an uncomfortable series of revelations, really, if you're ever going to grow, which I think makes sense. So there's that side of it. And that's also very deeply important, and yet all of this is trivialized. This is an incredibly important personal existential thing happening to us. And yet it's just, the subject of late-night comedy. It deserves better. As we move into the future, and I'm wrapping it up here, I talked about disclosure. I didn't really get into this field to talk about disclosure years ago. I had to be dragged into the field of disclosure. But because I read about the politics and the cover-up and that type of thing, I guess it seemed inevitable that I would be talking about the end of secrecy. You know, if you talk about secrecy, well, inevitably you'll speculate on what life is like when it ends. And it is a fascinating topic for sure, and I'm very glad that I helped to write a book on it. I would say that disclosure, despite how difficult it seems, despite how entrenched the web of lies in our society is today, I would say it's an inevitability. And I would say that we are moving at a faster and faster pace toward it. I would not offer a prediction to you as to when it will happen. And what is disclosure anyway? Disclosure is not the end of anything. It's just the beginning of a whole new level of the battle for truth. My take on it is simply that something is going to happen to force this issue. There's just too many new things happening in our world, too many new technologies, too many new ways for us to communicate with each other. Whether it'll be a mass sighting, whether it'll be like a WikiLeaks type of disclosure event, a leak of something, something's going to happen. You know, we're in a brand new world here. We're just starting out with our new global infrastructure. Something's going to happen, I believe it. So when it does, it's going to force the issue. But it won't force out all the truth. How could it? There's just too much there. The CIA and their allies are not just going to walk away from the table. So they're going to continue to try to control spin on this phenomenon, and it will be our job to fight for that truth. The one big difference between then and now is that in the future, at least this topic will be fair game for public discourse, because it will be acknowledged as a reality to some extent. We still won't have a lot of answers. Unless, you know, disclosure includes the president standing alongside a gray alien at a podium, we're going to have a lot of questions. Very likely, right? Very likely disclosure will have enough information to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is real, but maybe not enough to grab one of these beings and interview them. So there will still be many, many more opportunities for cultural wars beyond even what we have today. You have Christian fundamentalists who are going to interpret this one way. You have tree-hugging New Agers who are going to interpret this another way. And as I like to say, there's no bridge long enough to cover that gap. There just isn't, really. And so what will happen? The arguments will continue, and they will continue for generations until and unless we get more information to resolve it to everyone's satisfaction. That may happen, but in other words, disclosure is not just a magic bullet. It's a necessary thing, but it's not going to fix everything. We need to move away from utopian ideas. We can be idealists and want things to be better, but let's not delude ourselves into thinking that there's a magic bullet for anything. There isn't, I don't think. Disclosure will portend major, major changes, I think. And I wrote all about this in AD After Disclosure. And yes, I do have first editions of the book here if you want them. But basically, I think we're talking in every fundamental way of our society that this will be changed. Global, geopolitical, technological, scientific, cultural, religious, spiritual, you name it, it's revolution. Right, is really what we're talking about. I think it will happen, and that will be fun, that will be not fun, that will be a wild ride. It'll be all of those things. Let's not expect a get-out-of-jail-free card, though, even if we get something like free energy. And everyone loves to talk about free energy as our ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. Well, it would certainly be nice, I will say this as much as anyone, that if we have a source of clean fusion or clean zero-point energy or anything else, that yes, this could be a very, very good thing, all right? It would allow us not only not to pollute so much, but it would allow us actually to do some serious environmental remediation and a lot of other good things. Absolutely. On the other hand, free energy, just about done, thank you. We actually had free energy for a long time. It was called oil. Oil was basically free, and what did it allow us to do? Carve up the globe, eat up all the fish, do everything else. You know, we're still going to be scurrying about the world like termites, gobbling everything up, even with free energy. So we have to be careful. Will disclosure do other things like end the corporations or the hold of corporations over us? Will it be the end of money? There are people who say that it will. Will it mean the end of social stratification and inequality? Well, I'm skeptical about all of that, but that's just me. Will it mean the end of our need for physical bodies? There are people who say this. Again, I'm not on that one yet. Will it mean higher consciousness? Well, there I might say maybe yes. If for no other reason, because to me what consciousness is work. It's work to be aware in the moment, in your reality, and in the reality around you. And I will say, I think when there is this moment, that disclosure is out there, there will be billions of people in the world who will suddenly realize, my God, what have I been doing with my life? I believe that. And I think that it will trigger a kind of mass raising of awareness that I think will be a very good thing for all of us. The final real point here is that there may be a great moment of irony, which is simply that we'll learn in a post-disclosure world that the secret keepers may not have all of the answers as well. It wouldn't shock me that they too are probably still, even now, mystified by some of the things that we're dealing with. Again, because this is a very, very difficult topic. Will we ever get to the end of it? I really don't know, but I do think it is a topic that is worth our attention. And as you can see in this brief introduction, really this is an encapsulation of my newest book that will be out in about 2 or 3 months, which I'm calling UFOs for the 21st Century Mind, Understanding an Ancient Phenomenon in a New Era. I intend it to be, as I said before, a sophisticated introduction, a fresh view on this incredible topic that deserves the attention of the most brilliant minds we have in the world today. Thank you very much.